The Battle That Broke the King. Marston Moor, July 2nd, 1644. Chapter 1. The North was everything. By the summer of 1644, the north of England is the war, not the only theatre. There are royalist armies in the west, parliamentary forces threading through the Midlands, sieges and skirmishes scattered across the country, with the exhausting regularity of a conflict that has long since stopped being a single clean war and become several overlapping ones, each with its own logic and its own local catastrophes. But the north is where the strategic weight sits, where the decisive argument will be made, where the outcome will be written in a language that even Oxford's optimistic dispatches cannot subsequently misread. York is the second city of the kingdom, not merely in population and commerce, though both are significant, but in symbolic weight, in the psychological geography of a country that measures its own extent by the distance between its two great cities. To hold York is to hold the North's allegiance, or at least its acquiescence. To lose it is to concede the entire territory above the Trent, the royalist recruiting grounds that have supplied Charles's armies with the infantry and cavalry that have kept the war alive through 2 years of mounting attrition. Newcastle controls the coal that heats London's winters, that fires the forges and bakeries and domestic hearths of a city that Parliament cannot afford to leave cold and angry. The royalist position in the north is not simply a military advantage, it is the structural foundation on which any hope of Charles negotiating from strength, not winning perhaps, but negotiating, depends absolutely. Lose the north, and you lose the war's geography. Lose the war's geography, and the rest is arithmetic. Charles knows this. His commanders in Oxford know this, in the way that men who have been watching a strategic situation deteriorate for 18 months know the things they prefer not to say aloud. Prince Rupert, riding north in June 1644 with 12,000 men to relieve York from its parliamentary siege, knows it with the particular focused urgency of a man who has been given a task he cannot afford to fail, and temperamentally cannot approach with anything less than total commitment. He has relieved Newark in March. He has swept through Lancashire in May. He arrives at the approaches to York in late June, having covered the ground faster than anyone on the parliamentary side expected, his cavalry screening his march, his supply lines stretched but functional, his confidence intact, and perhaps slightly in excess of what the situation warrants. The orders themselves, the letter Charles sends to Rupert from Oxford, the letter that will be argued over for centuries, are worth examining at some length, because they illuminate with uncomfortable precision the command relationship at the heart of the royalist cause and the particular quality of misunderstanding that kills armies. Charles writes in late June instructing Rupert to relieve York and thereafter to fight the parliamentary and Scottish armies besieging it. The letter is urgent in tone, almost pleading in register, the language of a king who needs a victory and is writing to the man he trusts most to provide one. I command and conjure you by the duty and affection which I know you bear me, that all new enterprises laid aside, you immediately march, according to your first intention, with all your force to the relief of York. The wording is absolute. There is no conditional clause, no provision for the exercise of independent judgment, no acknowledgement that the military situation Rupert finds when he arrives might differ from the military situation Charles is imagining in Oxford. Rupert reads this as a direct command to seek battle. His other senior commanders, Newcastle above all, who has been fighting this war since its beginning and has developed the kind of strategic patience that only comes from watching brilliance repeatedly overreach itself, read it as an instruction that permits judgment about timing and ground. Charles, writing from Oxford with the characteristic combination of genuine strategic insight and inadequate information about conditions in the field, probably means something between the two. What he does not mean, what no rational reading of the strategic situation can support, is for Rupert to seek battle on the afternoon of the same day he relieves York, on ground he has not chosen and assessed, against a combined army of Scots and English that outnumbers his own force by 10,000 men. Before his infantry has rested from its march and before Newcastle's battered garrison has had time to resupply its depleted ammunition. Rupert seeks exactly this battle, the letter, the misreading, the battle, a chain of consequence so compressed and so expensive that it reads less like a military campaign than like a demonstration, conducted at the cost of thousands of lives, of the difference between written orders and intended meaning. If this kind of history, the real machinery underneath the dates and names, is what you come here for, then you already know what to do. And if you're new, welcome. Stay a while. Chapter 2. The armies on the moor. Marston Moor is flat. This is its primary military characteristic and the principal reason the battle happens there rather than on more varied ground. The moor stretches wide and open between the villages of Longmarston and Tockwith in the West Riding of Yorkshire, a broad agricultural expanse of rye fields and bean crops, bisected by a drainage ditch running roughly east to west, a feature so modest in normal times that it would not merit mention in any account of the landscape, and which will, by 9 o'clock in the evening, have become one of the battle's decisive geographical facts. There are hedges along the ditch's northern bank. There is broken ground around the flanks. Otherwise, the moor offers what moors generally offer: space, exposure, and the democratic invitation to fight without the shelter of terrain. It is not ground that rewards cleverness. It rewards mass, cohesion, and the capacity to continue moving forward when every sensible instinct argues for stopping. The armies assembling across the moor on the afternoon of July 2nd, 1644, are the largest yet gathered on English soil in this war. On the parliamentary and Scottish side, approximately 27,000 men, the combined forces of the Eastern Association under Manchester, the Scots under the Earl of Leven, that cautious, experienced old soldier who has seen enough of European warfare to be appropriately suspicious of optimism, and the Northern Association forces under Lord Fairfax and his son Thomas, whose army has been besieging York for 2 months, and is consequently tired in the particular way of men who have been doing something miserable for a long time, without resolution. On the Royalist side, 17,000 men under Rupert and the Marquis of Newcastle, who has spent the previous months defending York with a competence born of necessity, consuming his ammunition reserves and his patience in roughly equal proportions. Newcastle does not want to fight today. He says this. He says it directly, with the measured persistence of a man accustomed to being listened to and slowly recognizing that he is not being listened to now. The armies need rest. The hour is already past noon. Tomorrow the ground can be properly assessed, the infantry resupplied, the cavalry positioned with deliberation rather than haste. He wants reinforcements that are supposedly 3 days' march away. He wants, in the most fundamental sense, to apply to this situation the principle that has governed every successful defensive operation of his career, that the cautious choice, made consistently, compounds into survival, and that survival is the precondition of every other option. He is right about all of this. Rupert overrules him with the cheerful certainty of a man who has never yet been seriously wrong and consequently has no felt experience of what being seriously wrong costs. Newcastle, receiving the decision with the contained expression of a man filing evidence, withdraws to his coach. He will emerge when the armies are drawn up. In the interval, by various accounts, he smokes a pipe. This detail, the general in his coach, smoking, waiting for a battle he argued against, appears in enough independent sources to be probably true, and it has the particular quality of truth that consists of being entirely characteristic. Newcastle is a cultivated man, a playwright and a horseman, a peer of ancient family who has committed his fortune and his northern influence to the king's cause, and is watching it be spent by a younger man with better cavalry and worse judgment. Smoking seems exactly right. The deployment takes most of the afternoon. Both armies spread across the moor in the formations that 17th century military theory prescribes: cavalry on the flanks, infantry in the centre, artillery positioned along the front. The parliamentary line extends nearly 2 miles from flank to flank. The royalist line is somewhat shorter, the numerical disadvantage visible in the spacing of the formations and the thinner reserves. Rupert rides his lines with the thoroughness of a commander who uses personal inspection as a form of reassurance, reassuring his men and perhaps himself that the situation is manageable. The sun moves west. The afternoon becomes evening. At some point, the accounts disagree on the precise hour, settling roughly on 7 o'clock. The parliamentary commanders look across the moor at the royalist position and reach, with unusual speed, a collective decision. The royalists appear to be standing down for the night. Men are leaving the line to eat. The moment, if there is to be a moment, is now. Leven gives the order. A psalm rises from 27,000 throats. That extraordinary sound, a medieval instrument deployed in a modern war, the voices of Scots and English rising together across the bean fields in the July evening with the particular quality of conviction that only men who believe they are doing God's work can produce. Then the line moves forward. Chapter 3. 7 o'clock. The ditch. The dark. What follows in the next 2 hours is, by the standards of 17th century battle, unusually well documented. The engagement at Marston Moor produces more subsequent testimony than almost any other action of the Civil Wars, partly because of its scale, partly because of its significance, and partly because the participants, literate, theologically articulate, accustomed to examining their experiences for evidence of divine intention, write about it with a thoroughness that later historians find both invaluable and occasionally maddening, since no two accounts agree entirely on the sequence of events, and all of them are coloured by the retrospective certainty of men who know how it ends. What the documents collectively establish is this: the battle goes simultaneously and for an extended period in completely opposite directions on opposite flanks, creating perhaps 40 minutes during which the parliamentary cause is winning decisively on the left and losing catastrophically on the right, and nobody on either side is entirely certain which condition will prove permanent. On the parliamentary right, Fairfax's cavalry advances against Rupert's horse across ground, that is, in the July dusk, considerably more difficult than it appeared from a distance. There are hedges, there are rabbit warrens, there is the drainage ditch which the cavalry must cross under fire, losing formation in the process. Royalist musketeers positioned in the hedgerows on the northern bank deliver a fire that the parliamentary horse cannot properly answer, while crossing broken ground in failing light. Fairfax's cavalry, pressed from the front and disordered by the terrain, breaks, not in the way that cavalry sometimes breaks, with a ragged thinning of the line, a gradual loss of cohesion, but quickly, the collective nerve going all at once, men turning horses and riding. Thomas Fairfax is in the middle of it. He takes a sword cut across his cheek, a wound that will leave a scar he carries for the rest of his life, and finds himself separated from his command, alone or nearly alone, surrounded by royalist cavalry in the growing dark. He does what, in retrospect, only Fairfax would do. He removes his identifying field sign, rides at a walk through the royalist lines as though he belongs there, crosses to the other flank, and finds Cromwell. He's bleeding steadily from his face. He has just ridden a mile through enemy cavalry in the dark. He delivers his report with the calm of a man who has concluded that composure is the only thing currently under his control, and it is. On the parliamentary left, Cromwell's cavalry has been advancing against the royalist horse under Lord Byron, and Byron has made the error that Cromwell has been hoping he will make. Rather than receiving the parliamentary charge in position, behind the ditch on ground of his choosing, with the advantage of terrain, Byron advances to meet it, moving his cavalry forward into the open moor. The logic, presumably, is aggression. Meet them before they gather momentum, disrupt their formation while they are still deploying. The result is that Byron's cavalry meets Cromwell's troopers in the open on equal terms, without any of the positional advantages that a defensive stand behind the ditch would have provided. This is, for Byron, a significant miscalculation. Cromwell's cavalry hits Byron's advancing horse with the organised, controlled violence of men who have trained for exactly this. The discipline is visible even in the chaos of a cavalry engagement, the troopers keeping their formation, the officers maintaining command over individuals who have every instinctive reason to abandon formation and pursue their personal quarrels with the enemy at full gallop. Byron's horse breaks. The Scottish cavalry under David Leslie follows the pursuit, chasing royalist fugitives westward across the moor with the enthusiasm that cavalry pursuits always generate. Cromwell turns his remaining troopers. Here is the moment, here is the thing that separates this battle from Edgehill, from every royalist cavalry action of the preceding 2 years, from the tactical pattern that Prince Rupert has made the royalist cavalry's signature and its consistent strategic liability. Cromwell pulls his troopers up, horses blown, men blood up, the instinct of pursuit screaming in every nerve, and turns them back toward the centre of the battle, where the infantry engagement is still grinding on in the gathering dark, where Manchester's foot is pressing hard against royalist infantry that has not yet broken, where the battle is still, for a few more minutes, genuinely uncertain. He rides them across the moor in the dark. He brings them into the royalist infantry's flank. Thousands of people listen to this channel in the dark after a long day, because history told honestly is one of the few things that makes the world make sense. If that's you, share this with one person who'd understand why. Newcastle's infantry, his whitecoats, the pride of the Northern Royalist Army, men who have served since the war's beginning and whose coats, by one account, were undyed because they swore to dye them in enemy blood before they accepted any other colour, are still standing in their enclosure on the moor's edge when Cromwell's cavalry arrives in their flank. The royalist position has, by this point, collapsed on both flanks. Rupert's cavalry, having broken Fairfax on the right, has ridden on into the parliamentary baggage train 3 miles distant and is not coming back in any useful time. Byron's cavalry is scattered. The royalist artillery has been overrun. The Northern Army is reduced in the space of 90 minutes to this one formation, perhaps 3,000 infantrymen in a field surrounded, their ammunition nearly exhausted, their flanks gone, their commander last seen in his coach before the battle. They are offered quarter. They decline. This requires a moment because it is one of the stranger facts of an evening already full of strange facts. 3,000 men, surrounded and unsupported, choose to fight to the death rather than surrender to an enemy that has offered them their lives. The parliamentary cavalry and infantry attacking them are not, at this point, the most patient of men. They have spent 2 hours in a confused engagement in growing darkness. Their right flank has broken and partially recovered. Men they know are dead in the fields around them. They kill the white coats where they stand in the dark, in the enclosure, until there is almost nothing left to kill. 30 men survive, by some accounts, a few dozen by others. The numbers vary. The fact does not. By the time the moon rises over Marston Moor, 4,000 royalists are dead. 1,500 more are prisoners. The artillery is taken, every gun, every limber, the entire royalist field train that has supplied northern operations for 2 years. The baggage is taken. York, which Rupert has just relieved at such cost, surrenders 11 days later, the strategic rationale for its defence having evaporated on the moor, with the army sent to secure it. Newcastle boards a ship at Scarborough before the month is out and sails to Hamburg, taking his dignity intact and leaving his cause to manage without him. He will return at the Restoration, with the equanimity of a man who has always believed that exile, properly conducted, is preferable to defeat, improperly endured. He will write a book about horsemanship, which his surviving contemporaries will read with the various emotions that circumstance prescribes. He will live to be 83, which is more than most people in this story manage. Rupert rides from the field with perhaps 6,000 cavalry, all that remains of 17,000, and writes to Charles from somewhere on the road south, with the painful compression of a man who has no way to improve the news by expanding it. York is lost. The army is broken. The north is gone. He is 24 years old. He will not believe, for some time, that this cannot be recovered. Chapter 4. Oxford. The Letter. The candles. The dispatch reaches Oxford on the 5th of July, 3 days after the battle. Charles is in the study where he has been conducting the war's administration for 2 years, the same room where the maps are spread and annotated, where the correspondence accumulates in the particular organised profusion of a government that has relocated to a university and acquired some of its habits, where the candles burn late and the secretaries maintain the fiction of a court in full operation rather than a court in extended retreat. He has read bad dispatches before. He has read the ambiguous accounting of Edgehill, the frustration of Newbury, the steady quarterly deterioration of his financial position that every set of accounts contains, if you read them with sufficient honesty, which Charles does because, whatever else he is not a man who deceives himself about numbers. He reads the Marston Moor dispatch standing up, which is apparently how he receives urgent communications. His face does not change significantly. The accounts of those present, and there are several accounts, the moment being one that people remember in detail, describe a man absorbing information with the composure that 3 years of bad news have made into something close to habit. He asks precise questions about the condition of Rupert's surviving cavalry. He asks about the state of York's garrison before its surrender. He asks whether Newcastle's infantry losses are as total as the dispatch suggests. They are. He folds the letter, sets it on the desk, with the careful precision of a man who needs to keep his hands doing something purposeful. He goes to chapel. what he does not do, what he cannot do, because the arithmetic of the situation will not permit it, is identify a pathway to military victory that does not require the recovery of conditions that no longer exist. He can continue the war, which he will, through Naseby in June of the following year, through the fall of Oxford, through the long diminuendo of a campaign that still produces individual royalist victories in the West and in Wales, but cannot reconstitute the strategic architecture that Marston Moore has destroyed. He can negotiate, which he also will, with the particular quality he has always brought to negotiation, genuine in its expression, tactical in its intention, and received by its intended beneficiaries with the wariness of men who have been negotiating with him for 5 years. What he cannot recover is the North. And without the North, the war is a question of when, not whether. Cromwell writes to Valentine Walton 3 days after the battle, that same Walton whose son died at Gainsborough, whose grief Cromwell addressed in the letter that first revealed the quality of conviction underneath the military competence. He writes with the particular intensity of a man who has just watched his understanding of the war confirmed at a scale that leaves no room for alternative interpretation. We never charged, but we routed the enemy. God made them as stubble to our swords. We are never so much in danger as when the enemy flies. The last sentence is the most interesting. We are never so much in danger as when the enemy flies. The recognition, hard won through 2 years of watching parliamentary cavalry pursue routed royalists into irrelevance, that the moment of apparent victory is the moment of actual vulnerability, that the cavalry that chases is the cavalry that loses the battle. It has just won. He has built his entire command practice on this principle. He has just demonstrated it on the largest stage the war has provided. The enemy has fled. The battle is won. The North is taken. He is not, one notes, particularly surprised. Charles remains in Oxford through the summer, the autumn, and into the following year, the court maintaining its routines with the determined persistence of an institution that has not yet decided to admit what it knows. The meadows stay green. The river stays slow. The bells ring the hours with their usual indifference to the events occurring just outside their range. Scholars continue to occupy the colleges. Royalist officers continue to present themselves at the presence chamber with the bearing of men who have chosen to believe that the strategic situation is recoverable because the alternative is to stop believing in the enterprise that has cost them everything. The enterprise has, in fact, been decided, not ended. It will take another year to end, another campaign, another battle on a Northamptonshire field where Cromwell's cavalry will again turn from the pursuit and strike the infantry in the flank, and the king will watch from a rise to the north and be physically prevented from charging into the collapse by companions who understand, even if he does not yet, that the time for that gesture is past. But decided. The night on the moor, in the dark, beside the drainage ditch has decided it in the space of 90 minutes, in the interval between Cromwell turning his cavalry and the Whitecoats declining their quarter in the enclosure, with the merciless compression of events that have been building toward their conclusion for 15 years and, once released, do not linger. The candles burn in Oxford. The secretaries wait with their pens. The summer evening lies across the Isis meadows in the long gold light of a season that does not know or does not care that the war it is illuminating is already, in all the ways that matter, over.